Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. Now we come to the episode entitled Captain Nemo. As the title suggests, this involves Ray, Robert, and a couple of their buddies playing basketball, sponsored by Nemo's Pizzeria. And this is the first time this type of group is mentioned throughout the show, and they bring it up a couple times after that, but for its debut, it's an interesting concept. Now, they've been playing for years together. They're in this thing that they call the Pizza League, but as it shows throughout the episode, it looks like it's a basketball league that is run between a bunch of restaurants in the area. They mention Nemo's Pizzeria, they mention Wohop's Chinese Takeout. At the beginning, the running gag is, why is even Bed Bath & Beyond even in this thing? They shouldn't be in here. Guess I decided to get customers by sponsoring a basketball team. And considering how often they go to Nemo's, it's no surprise that Ray, Robert, and their buddies are on the pizza team. Well, they're doing pretty bad against Bed Bath & Beyond, that's a gag. The captain, Kevin, played by Kevin James, in his first of many appearances on the show. This is his only appearance this season, and he'll make his most appearances next season, and that'll be the end of his run as Kevin. To talk about it later in another episode where it's more applicable. But this is a nice little debut for him, though it's kind of hard to gauge what his character's supposed to be other than the fact he's the captain. The team turns against Kevin because of him being a little bit too aggressive in the locker room. So they're like, alright, who are we going to pick? Andy suggests it's going to be Ray. Then Ray's like, let's open it up to discussion. And they all suggest Robert, because as Andy says, Robert, he's tall. Which, I'm not as tall, given I'm tall. Being tall is not everything when it comes to basketball. I mean, it helps, but you also have to know how to play, and you also have to be good at it. Me, I'm passable, so if they were to like me on that, I probably would do alright, but I wouldn't do as good as it shows that Robert does. But then again, the Barone boys, as they mentioned throughout the series, they played a lot of sports when they were in school, so it makes sense that him being tall and being familiar with the sport, Robert's going to do a pretty good job as captain. But from the get-go, you can tell that Ray is jealous of this. He wanted to be captain, and now his brother took it, but he's trying his best not to talk about it. And it's brought out of him when he's talking with Deborah when he gets home, talking about the game and all that. And she's like, you want to be captain, teasing him. And he's like, yeah, I kind of do. Because this is the closest we've ever come to winning a championship, and I think I can push us over the top. This whole obsession with Ray wanting to be captain is at odds with Deborah and her little part of the plot of this episode, and that is, she does not understand why Ray is still in this pizza league at this point, why winning the championship is such a big obsession for him, and also that the fact that he is putting so much time and effort into it means he's going to be missing stuff with the family. Now, as a kid, I always found this part funny, and I still do find it funny now, but as an adult, I'm a little bit more conflicted on it, and I'm going to have two minds on it. On one hand, I can understand where Deborah is coming from with this, because as we've seen a little bit already in this show, and as we'll see even more, Ray is a little lazy when it comes to doing stuff around the house. I mean, he'll do the dishes and stuff half-assily. I mean, this episode even starts with him doing that. I mean, he's trying to put dishes away, and it turns out they're ones that are dirty. It's like, really, Ray, you can't tell that these dishes are dirty, they're not clean? I mean, I can even tell that without my glasses. Doesn't clean up around the house, only helps out with the kids when Deborah has to force him to, either because she asked about it ahead of time, or she asked about it in the episode, he ends up doing it, and then, as we saw in the pilot episode, throws it off to his mother just to get out of there. He's kind of a man-child, but not fully, but he has those tendencies. So you can understand where Deborah's coming from with this whole thing. It's like, you're missing out on it. And as we see in the episode, he misses out on a major thing because he misses out on Michael saying his first word. They don't say what it is, but the way that the gag is built up is like, ooh, he probably said something that involved the F word. Or the A word, but I think the F word's a bit funnier, especially for a kid to burst out, and as Deborah says, it was like you were in the car, Ray. Probably like that. If it's the A word, it's probably like that scene in Meet the Fockers. Asshole. Ray's lazy. On the other hand, I do see where Ray is coming from with everything. You know, he's been playing with these guys for years. This is the closest they've been to getting that championship. And all he really needs is that one game and one series of games in order to get the championship and hold it above his head and go, yeah, we finally did it, boys. All that sweat and tears was worth it. And as an aside with that, this is a hobby of his. Ray has always been into sports. I mean, he's a sports writer. He went to school to get his degree for writing, which they never specify what type of writing degree he has. They just specify he has one. I'm guessing he got the general writing degree, or the general journalism degree. But he went to it, he got it, and he applied and worked towards writing specifically for sports. Basing it based both on his journalism degree and the fact that he played a bunch of sports, watches everything, so he is a sports expert to a point. Playing sports like this, and along with golfing, are his hobbies. And I will say this, people should always have hobbies. You should always have hobbies. And the way that Deborah comes across in this episode at times, it seems like she's trying to get Ray to give up his hobbies. And I know that sounds a little weird for me to say that, but as we see in later episodes involving golf, it also seems like she's giving you that vibe. Especially when Ray says stuff about like finding his golf clubs upside down in the garbage can, or her complaining about all the time he spends on golf. However, when you combine that with the fact he does nothing, you can kind of understand why she's against him having hobbies. But on the other end, she needs to realize you can't ask someone to give up their hobbies. But this is where that whole thing about communication comes. And in this episode, she even says something that kind of ties in with both sides of it, and that is that I gave up stuff when we had kids, which of course leads to Ray's little funny little one-liner. I know, but did it have to be sex? That ties in with his whole pathetic character trait of always wanting sex and sometimes even begging for it. Get back to the main thing. Even when you have children, you shouldn't give up your hobbies. I mean, less than how often you're able to do them, obviously, especially when they're younger, as they are in this season. I mean, the twins are toddlers, and Allie's like 5, I believe, at this point. So not being able to do them as often, I understand. As they get older, you're able to do them a bit more, you know, because by that point, a bit easier for grandparents to watch them if you want to do hobbies, or if they have the same hobby and interest of you can integrate them into it. But you shouldn't, force your spouse to give up hobbies. And this is regardless of the genders. I know in this one it's Ray being the man, Deborah being the woman. Even if you swapped it and it was a man getting on his wife about her hobbies and trying to get her to lessen them, I would still be defending. Especially since that one probably would include a little bit of misogyny, but that's usually how the writing goes. I know someone's probably going to say, well, you're single and all that. You don't know how it is with that. It's like, I've been in relationships before, so I know from that standpoint how it goes. You got to balance it all out. The children aspect, yeah, personally, I don't know. But I have friends with similar hobbies that have had children. They haven't given up their hobbies. And one of them is integrating the child in the hobby in such a way that once this child is of age, she will more than likely be into the hobby just like we are, and she'll just be another member of the group. LARP, cosplay, no matter what the hobby is. LARP, cosplay, sports, video games. No matter what the hobby is, there's always a way to either integrate your family into it or to try to balance your enjoyment of it with your family life. Now, if anything, that's the issue that Ray has, is that he does not find a way to do that. Or hasn't yet, as we'll find out later in this episode. Now, after all this, we get to see the aftermath of the first game with Robert as captain. And he goes all drill instructor on them, even though they win. He's like, gentlemen, that was a disgrace. This was a moral defeat. Goes all tyrant on them, and they're scared of him, and they essentially turn on Robert. He quits, marks out, and Ray becomes captain, and now he has to take on even more responsibilities, which ties into the whole thing with Deborah. She's more annoyed, and because of this, he can't go to the birthday party that he was planning on going with her to, which At that point, you can kind of understand some of her frustration in this episode. It's like, really, Ray? There's one thing you go in the hobby, now you're doing this? And they lose the first game with Ray as captain, so I guess you could say that's karma or poetic justice. And Marie finds out about the whole situation, what happened about Robert quitting, Ray becoming captain. And she assumes that Ray made Robert quit and then took his spot. It's not really what happened, but that's how it kind of comes across in the scene where Robert quits, complete with him going, "Et tu, Raymond?" And with how Robert would probably explain it to Marie, that's how she would interpret it. She always seems to interpret things weirdly when it comes to one of her boys betraying the other. She storms across, yells at Ray, and my favorite part of this scene is after Ray explains to Marie what happened in the Robert stormed out. She's like, "Who the hell in this family acts like that?" And storms out of the room. It's like, look in the mirror, Marie. That would be you. If the boys get it from anyone, it's from you. Of course, Ray tries to talk Robert into coming back, and there's a lot of Chinese food on the table, which that's the first hint, like, ooh, bribery. Robert declines unless he's brought back to be captain, and he decides to side with Wohop's Chinese takeout, because as he puts it, they put a very lovely offer on the table. The gag still gets me all these years later, because like, it's a literal offer on the table. Bribery. He mentions Kung Pao, so it makes me wonder, what other Chinese a la carte did they give him? But there's probably some teriyaki chicken, some General Tso's chicken, a bunch of other chicken choices. And this is New York Chinese food. I haven't had New York Chinese food, but I've had New Jersey Chinese food. It's actually pretty good. I mean, how they do the fried rice wasn't my thing. Too many onions in the fried rice. But the teriyaki chicken was good from what I remember. Now, after a discussion with Andy, Kevin, and the rest of the squad in his shower, Ray decides he's going to retire as captain when he sees Deborah interacting with the twins and Allie at the table, and he realizes, you know what? Deborah has a point. Even though I love my hobbies and I probably should make time for them, I also got to make time for my family. If only that was a plot point that stuck throughout the rest of the show. But as you know, with these sitcoms, or at least certain ones, certain plot elements, they're not going to keep a strict continuity with. I mean, it's mainly Marie and Deborah's relationship that is the victim when it comes to this, but at times Ray and Deborah's are, and this is one of the instances. They don't really stick to it. It's a nice little moment, though, at the end where he says he's going to, be retired, and then he ends up making breakfast for Deborah. And, of course, this cuts to a post-lovemaking scene, which is the beginning of the epilogue, and just the shot of it, the way it's angled, it's like, you don't really see that many shots like that in this sitcom, whether in the format in general or in this show. It's shots like this you only see in the first season of this show, so it's like, they got a little creative. It's a bit more cinematic. And of course, with how they are in the bed, you're like, ooh, yeah, probably. I mean, they're obviously probably not naked underneath the sheets, but just the way, everything's set up, it's the implication of nudity without actually seeing nudity. So it works for a network show. And it leads to us seeing, Robert did join, and Wohops is the champions. They are the champions. On the whole, Captain Nemo is a pretty entertaining episode. It has a nice little conflict between Ray and Deborah that, like I said, I'm of two minds of now that I'm an adult. But it's one of those ones that makes you think, and it does have a nice little resolution at the end, even if it's not strictly adhered to. Nice little drama between Robert and Raymond, even though I think it's mainly Robert misinterpreting the situation at hand when he was talking with Ray, everything considered. Then again, Ray probably could have defended Robert a little bit more in that whole thing. Like, guys, calm down. And then talk with Robert on the side. But given the whole thing with Robert living in Ray's shadow throughout his whole life, we can kind of understand why Robert reacts the way he does, at least with Ray. Even though Frank and Marie are only in one scene each, they're used pretty well for what we see of them. It's a nice little family-centric episode. It's also nice it's the first time we see Kevin on the show, Kevin James. And, of course, also the first appearance of the character Andy, who he appears in the next episode, too, and he's of all the reoccurring minor characters, he's probably the most prolific. Kevin appears in, I think, 6 episodes next season, and the next 3 appearances of Kevin James, there's him playing his character Doug. I don't know how many episodes Gianni is in, but I think he's probably the second most prolific, if you don't count his actor's cameo in this season, which I'll address that when we get to that episode. And he's a nice little character. He's one of those men that you just look at him and you're like, that's why they're not married. And they kind of nail home that aspect of him by having him drink orange juice out of the carton in Ray's kitchen. It's like, this is the reason you're not married, Andy. Although the closest is in season 3, which I'll address that episode when we get to it. There's actually a couple moments in that episode I gotta talk about for nostalgic purposes. Definitely one of the episodes of this season you should watch. As for how this episode is placed, definitely from how it's constructed, an episode that could only have occurred in the first couple seasons, but the basic plot elements just tweak them just a little bit. And this is an episode you could have seen in any season. Probably been a bit harder to place it in the later seasons, but like maybe the mid-seasons could have seen it done. Of the season 1 episodes, definitely comes with my recommendation. It is in the running for the best of the season, but it would definitely fall before the next episode.